Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellknight here, bringing another video from Grab the Lantern today. Riot have revealed their plans for 2023 in an article published earlier today, which I will have linked down in the description. But I am very excited to talk through you guys all these changes and see kind of the direction that the game is heading in. Now, importantly to note, 2023's preseason isn't intended to be a huge shakeup to the game in the way that previous preseasons have been. I know last year, for example, we had 2 new Drakes introduced to the game alongside 2 new Elemental Rifts. Previously, we've had the Mythic Runes Reforged, a lot of different very major updates, and this update isn't going to be as major, but there's still a ton of things that we're going to be discussing in the update. I think most importantly, obviously you guys all know that Chemtech Drake was removed over the year because it was not balanceable. Chemtech Drake is going to be returning to the game in Preseason 2023. Its abilities have changed. It now grants tenacity and healed and shield strength per stack, and the soul now grants bonus damage when you're below a certain amount of health. So already I really like these changes. I think that the bonus damage when below a certain amount of health is pretty irrelevant for a lot of champions other than like frontliners who can actually use that bonus damage at low health because they're gonna hit that health threshold versus like an AD carry who gets chunked low and basically has to stop fighting. But I do like the stacking buff. The tenacity and heal and shield strength I think is a really interesting way and something that you can certainly see teams trying to scrap over to stack up. There's also going to be the Chem Rift, which will mutate all of the plants to essentially enhance their effects. Blast Cones blast you twice as far as before. Honey Fruits now slow champions, or they don't slow champions that consume them and give you a bonus shield in addition to the heal. And Scryer's Bloom now reveals in a circle around the plant as well as a cone in the direction it was hit, and gives you bonus movement speed towards enemy champions that were revealed, and reduces wards revealed to 1 health. It's a lot of effects, I think, already for this Rift, but generally it's all plant-based. The only thing you have to worry about is that all of the plants are going to be significantly better than they were before. I am interested to see what people use, especially the stem fruits and blast cones. I think have the opportunity for a lot of really interesting outplay abilities. So we'll see how it goes. I do think it'll feel less impactful just because the Rift isn't changing as much as it does for the other Rifts, but I think it will still be enough to help it distinguish itself and stand out on its own. I'm a little sad about the stealth fields going away, but I know a lot of players didn't like it. I am in the minority, so that's probably fine. Now we come to something that I am not entirely sure I like, and these are the Avatar Smites and Jungle Pets. There's nothing here that talks about Avatar Smites, so I'm not quite sure what Riot are getting at from there, but suffice it to say, the pets that were hinted at in a previous article that Lol Garena put out too early and then retracted, the pets are now confirmed as something that Riot are going to be adding to the game in Preseason 2023. The idea is that you buy them in the shop as an egg, the pets acquire treats through monster kills and slowly over time, and then they evolve at a certain point, and when they're evolved, they give their owners buffs that empower them with different abilities. There are 3 current pets in the game. The Ember Cat gives you slows and bonus damage. The Ishtali Ixamander gives you a shield based on your health that provides bonus slow resistant tenacity when broken. And the Ionian Cloud Leaper gives you bonus movement speed. Now, I don't know that I like these. And there are 2 reasons for this, one of which Riot may have already addressed. First, again, I know that there aren't any details about this so far, but I feel like the biggest issue I have is that the reason Riot removed farming jungle items is because they disincentivized interaction. When Devourer was in the game, when Feral Flare was in the game, the whole point of those items is I am not going to interact with anyone on the map for 20 minutes. I'm just going to clear my jungle, I'm just farming it out, and once my jungle item is complete, then I actually go participate in fights, and I come out of the jungle stronger than anyone else. These items seem very similar, right? If you gank, you're basically wasting time that you could have been farming jungle camps to evolve your little critter. If you're contesting an objective, you're wasting time that you could have been farming camps to evolve your little critter. It seems like that's the exact route that Riot are taking, which is disincentivizing actual interaction and players working together and junglers doing something because they're busy farming their little pet. The other issue I have is potentially overcomplicating the jungle. If you have to buy a pet plus your jungle item, I think that's sort of a bad thing. I think that's really a bit of a disadvantage. I'm not a big fan of that if they do both, but again, Riot may have actually addressed this and said, you know, hey, these are going to be replacing your jungle items, at which point I think that's okay. I'm also worried about the Embercat. It just says it gives slows and bonus damage. To me, that sounds like you just have a perma red buff, which would be really, really powerful. So I don't know that I particularly like that idea, though of course, again, we don't have details yet. But this is the one part of the preseason preview that I am the most worried about, and the most just not on board. I don't really like this, but we'll have to see how the actual execution went. I know a lot of people, for example, didn't like plants when they were revealed, and plants ended up being fine. So we'll see how this goes, but suffice to say, I'm not a big fan of this so far. Riot have also made a few other quality of life changes to the jungle. Leash indicators are going to be more obvious, so you'll be able to know exactly where you can stand before the camp decides it resets. And they've also decreased the distance camps can be pulled, so you don't have to do 2 camps at the same time to be perfectly optimal. I'm of two minds about this. On one hand, I do feel like this really helps lower skill players who are just trying to learn the jungle and who don't have time to figure out, okay, I can hit this guy and then walk over here and stand exactly here and then hit this guy and then he'll come over to me and I can do 2 camps at the same time, right? Like, I do like this. But I do feel like it reduces the overall skill ceiling of the game, right? Pros, obviously, could do that. They did that every single game because they wanted perfectly optimal clears. That's no longer a way for them to show their skill or mastery because they're just farming camps like everybody else now. That's why I'm not a big fan of this. I do feel like the overall reduction in skill ceiling is a detriment, and I feel like if you're a lower skilled player, you were probably just doing camps 1 at a time anyways, and that was fine for whatever level you were at. And if you wanted to be a higher skill player, you would learn the ways in which you can do that. I have no intention of being a professional jungler, so there's no way I'm going to learn this mechanic, right? But and that's sort of what I'm getting at. If you're a lower skill player, you probably don't have to learn it. If you are intending to be a higher skill player, though, you are going to learn this mechanic. And so I don't like that it's being removed because it's just removing something from the game that is a way for professionals to show their skill level. So not a big fan of that. Riot did, however, add in recommended jungle paths. I think this is a good way, and basically every camp is flagged with a number to tell you the exact order to farm them in. I think this is probably fine. I do think it'll help newer players. I'm hoping that it's a toggle, so if I decide I don't care what the recommended jungle route is first, that I don't have to see it. I'm also hoping that potentially if I do camps out of order, so if I start red buff and go immediately to Raptors, which is against their little flowchart, that all the numbers clear because now I've done things out of order. Again, that would be a really nice change for me in particular, but I generally think this is a good way to help newer players learn exactly how they should be clearing the jungle. The updated ping wheel, I know we've talked about some of this stuff before, guys, but I'm going to be going through it because we've gotten more details. The updated ping wheel is back. It does have all of the same pings that we had previously, as well as an additional ping wheel that now is entirely focused around vision, where you can now ping vision cleared, enemy vision, or need vision. Again, I like more information is never a bad thing, but I do feel like almost all of the newer pings, the push, all in, hold, and bait pings, are just not that relevant. I really can't see myself using them. Maybe some other players will find uses for them, but I don't think they're particularly valued. The vision pings as well. It's an entirely new wheel, so you probably need to have another keyboard hotcut or a keyboard hotkey set up. I don't know that I like this very much, but I do like that at least we're keeping the enemy vision ping. And again, more information isn't necessarily a bad thing, so this is probably just me being an old fogey and not liking things changing. Objective voting is a thing. You can basically look at an objective, and you and your team can decide if you would like to take it or give it, and you can vote on this. It's weird. I think it'll help in solo queue, especially for everyone just being on the same vein with an objective. I am curious as to how it's going to work. Is it always there? Does it reset every minute or so, right? If Drake is sitting there for ages because it's a Cloud Drake and no one wants to take it, is that voting thing still just hanging out there? Does someone have to ping it first and then the voting thing shows up, right? Because like I'm assuming every tower in the game doesn't have an objective voting thing hovering by it, so it's just a little bit more, it's more things to worry about, but I guess it is relevant to an objective, so it's probably fine. And Riot have also done some small things with off-screen pings where enemy missing will always display on your screen versus other pings that will only display if they're basically on your screen at all, they'll show up. But otherwise, you will always see the enemy missing ping, which is quite nice. There's also some small updates here to warding. Ally wards will have a new visual appearance that will change when they reach 60 and 30 seconds remaining before they expire, which is nice. That way you know when you have wards that are going to be going away. And enemy ward timers as well. So if you ping an enemy ward that you saw them place within the last 10 seconds, a perfectly accurate ward timer appears until it is removed or expires. I don't know how much, especially at the higher tiers of play, pros know the exact to-the-second timer on a given ward. I would be curious as to, because look, if they did, if they do have that, then I think this is fine. It's a good way of saying, look, this is known information. You saw them put down the ward. You would know exactly when it's going to expire. I think that in that regard is fine. I could see this, again, I'm curious as to the exact mechanics because, for example, I see the enemy support leave and start roaming upriver. Do I just start pinging bushes because on the off chance that they're like warding on their way up, I can reveal that ward and get a timer for it? That's sort of my curious thing, because it doesn't have to be when the ward is visible from the sound of it. It just sounds like if they put it down anytime the last 10 seconds, you can ping it and get a timer. I'm not sure about that, but I'm assuming that once we get more details, I'll feel a lot better about this. Riot talked a little bit about recommended rune pages, summoner spells, and abilities. We have details on that. Now, once you lock in your champion, you'll see a button that you can press to open up a display for rune and summoner spell setups. Again, this is great because it's optional. It is totally opt-in. If I decide I know what I'm doing, I don't ever have to press the button, and I can just build my runes and summoner spells the way I want them to. But if you're a brand new player, I just locked in a brand new champion, I have no idea what's going on, I can press that button and get good recommendations. I quite like this. The recommended abilities, though, Riot give you recommendations on which abilities to be maxing and which order in-game, and I don't know that I like this because it doesn't sound optional. Again, I'm hoping this is a toggle, so I can just turn it off and not have to worry about the game telling me what to max. But I do like the idea that they're giving recommendations for players so they can take some of the guesswork out of champion builds. I think the biggest thing here, though, are the new and updated items. There are 12 new or updated items in this preseason that I'm going to be going through with you guys. I'm very excited about a lot of these. There are some new tank mythics, there's a couple new mage mythics, I believe, and some reworks to existing items, and I'm really the most excited about these changes. So let's go ahead and delve right into things, starting with the first new tank mythic, which is called Acacia's Endurance. These are all placeholder names, though, guys, so they can change prior to coming out. This is giving the usual tank package of 400 health, 30 armor, 30 MR, and 20 ability haste. And this is going to be your new tank brawling item. Because Sunfire Cape and Turbo Chemtech, spoiler alert, they are now no longer mythic items. This I actually think is a really good thing, because I feel like those items were very universally good for tanks. Sunfire Cape, for example, was like a staple of tank play back in the day, and you basically don't see that anymore because you can't afford to build it, right? If I decide I want a Frostfire Gauntlet or a Turbo Chemtech, boom, I'm locked out of building a Sunfire Cape permanently. And I feel like that's a detriment for a lot of tanks that do want it. So I like the fact that Sunfire Cape is now a default item. Same with Turbo Chemtech. I'm Cho'Gath, but I need to brawl with someone top lane, but I still need a way to get into a fight. So I want Chemtech, but I can't build both. I like the fact that then following these changes, you can build a Chemtech. Of course, those two items are weaker now. They've lost a couple of their bonus on-hit passives, but generally they work exactly the way that they did before. They give similar item stats. Of course, they're not giving a mythic passive anymore. I do quite like those changes. So to return to what I was starting with here, Acacia's Endurance is the new brawling tank item. For every second in champion combat, you gain a stack granting 3 armor and MR up to 10 max. That's 30 armor and MR at maximum stacks. And at max stacks, you become empowered, instantly draining enemies around you for 4% of your maximum health each, reduced to 1% against minions and monsters, and doubling your resist from stacks until the end of combat. This is on a 60-second cooldown. The mythic passive gives all other legendary items 5 armor and MR. I think this is a really interesting way of sort of giving tanks inevitability to be able to say, hey, look, you better kill me before too long, or I'm going to do this big drain move, I'm going to get a ton of health back, I'm going to get a ton of resist until the end of combat, so you will basically have to leave combat at that point. I do quite like this as a tank item, especially giving them the ability to brawl with people for an extended period of time. Obviously, I feel like this is less relevant in teamfights because it just doesn't take that long, but it does give bonus stacks of armor and MR. The fact that it gives you a lot of armor and MR when you're likely at low health, as well as a big heal when you're likely at low health, does mean that it gives you the chance to have some low health heroics as a frontline tank. It's an interesting item, and I'm curious to see how players are going to use it. Radiant Virtue is another new Mythic item with the exact same tank stat line. The Mythic passive gives all other legendary items 100 health, and this ability, and this item has the unique passive Guiding Light. Upon casting your ultimate, you transcend, increasing your maximum health by 10% for 9 seconds, and while you're transcended, you and your allies within 1200 range gain 25 non-ultimate ability haste, and you and your allies heal for 1.5% of your max health every 3 seconds, increasing up to 100% based on that champion's missing health, and the healing is always doubled on you. This is an interesting one, and it really is going to be good on initiator tanks, but more specifically, initiator tanks that want to initiate with their ultimate and who aren't ever interacting with enemy champions, because this provides you with no passive benefits at all outside of just its raw stats, right? Because this only triggers when you cast your ult. So this is going to be really good for a tank like, let's say, Malphite, where he, like, especially in the jungle, right? A jungle Malphite or jungle Sejuani who aren't brawling with anybody, so they don't need the passive combat stats for something like the Acacia item I just talked about. So instead, this says, once it's go time, you can press your big go time button, you gain a ton of healing, you gain a ton of value, and you're giving that to your friends to help sort of lead the charge into combat. Very interesting cooldown, very interesting item, and I'm interested to see how tanks are going to use this. Iceborne Gauntlet. You'll notice I didn't say Frostfire Gauntlet because it has gotten some changes. It looks like it no longer builds out of Bambi Cinder. It no longer gives the Immolate passive. It's basically back to what it was before. Before Riot reworked it to make it a Mythic item. It's basically back to that state, but it is still a Mythic item. Its new Mythic passive gives other legendary items 50 health, 5% tenacity, and 5% slow resist. And importantly, the primary target of the Iceborne Gauntlet ability is now slowed for double the normal amount and has their damage against you reduced by 10% for 2.5 seconds. This is now the ability to single out a specific target. It's a diver type ability. You're picking a single guy that you want killed, you're diving on top of him, you're creating the slowing field that's going to prevent them from running away, you're reducing their damage against you. Obviously there's still the AoE damage that you're doing, but generally this is like, I'm going for one guy and one guy in particular, right? Again, to use an example that in my wheelhouse, I'd build this on Malphite and dive the enemy AD carry. The first thing I do after ulting is auto attack him once for this slow and the damage reduction. I really do kind of like this this play pattern and what this item can theoretically do. Again, though, this is still a Mythic item, so it will still be eating your Mythic slot. It's not giving the Immolate passive anymore, but that's sort of neither here nor there. There's a new tank Mythic here as well, Goliath's Ascendancy. This gives 800 health, 200% base health regen, and 20 ability haste. While you're within 600 range of a champion, you charge up a powerful attack over 3 seconds. The attack drains the target for 50 plus 10% of your max health as bonus physical damage and heals you for that same amount, and you permanently gain health equal to 15% of the drain. The Mythic passive grants all their legendary items 1% increased health and 6% champion size. So this has gotten the passive from the old Frostfire Gauntlet, and is sort of like super Grasp of the Undying, right? You stay in combat with a guy for long enough that you can do this big hit that's going to heal you for a lot, damage them for a bunch, and grant you bonus health. So this is certainly the kind of item that you're going to be buying if you are in a side lane against a split-pushing champion, because you're going to have access to this cooldown quite a bit. Importantly, it only grants health, so you have to be a health stacking tank to want this. And I'm not sure who this is specifically for. I think a lot of the other tank items I could kind of figure out who wanted it. This one is a bit weird, and I'm really curious to see who's actually going to want to build this following its release, but I do think it's a very powerful item for sure. Rod of Ages is back. It is a new mage mythic item. It gives 20 health, 20 mana, and 4 ability power every minute up to 10 times. And at max stacks, you gain a level as well, and the Mythic passive grants other legendary items 5 ability haste. This is just great. I love Rod of Ages. I think it's a really good scaling choice for mages who decide, I don't care about anything in lane, I just want to scale and hit the late game. For example, Ryze or Cassiopeia, who are just here to get CS and try to hit their late game power spikes. This is really cool, especially given that it gives you a free level, allowing you to potentially hit a really important level breakpoint. One can imagine, for example, you're level 10 when this finally maxes, or you're level 15 when this finally maxes, and it gives you that extra point, that extra level to upgrade your ultimate again. It's an interesting one for sure, and I really do like this. And of course, coming with Rod of Ages is the Catalyst of Aeons. It has been returned. It works the exact same way it used to before. It restores mana equal to 15% of the damage you take, and health equal to 20% of the mana you spend, up to 15 health per cast. So, really like this. The one concerning thing for me is mages now have 5 mythic items. As far as I know, none of the other mage mythics have been removed, which means that they just have a ton of choices, but this feels okay because at least mages have the most broad degree of stats that they want and passives that they want, because it's not a very coherent class, right? Like Juggernauts pretty much all have the same things that they care about and want. Mages kind of don't. So I am a fan of this. I do think that this is probably fine. Moving on, the Abyssal Mask now. The only thing that's changing about Abyssal Mask is that it now builds out of a Catalyst of Aeons, so it has the Eternity passive, so you don't have to worry about that. I've talked about Sunfire Aegis and Turbo Chemtech. Those are both now non-mythic items and have had their power level reduced appropriately. Big fan of this. Randwind's Omen got a small change where it is reducing more damage by attacks because it scales with your maximum health up to 40% of the attack's damage, which means that it's going to be very relevant against auto-attack heavy enemy team compositions or enemy champions. Spear of Shojin is back, and I'm very scared about this one. It now says your non-ultimate spells gain bonus ability haste based on your bonus AD, and there's a ranged melee split here, so don't worry about it being potentially broken on certain champions. Melee champions get more cooldown reduction, and ranged champions do not. And this is also reduced, though, for immobilizing spells. So what this means is you have, your non-ultimate spells have reduced cooldowns, but the cooldown isn't reduced by as much if it's an ability that immobilizes champions. It also gives increased movement speed based on your missing health. This is a bit of a weird one, and I'm very scared of it. It does feel like this was a requirement, given that Navori Quick Blades are a critical strike item, so not every fighter could build this because they don't care about crit. So this is a way to say, hey, you're an AD caster. This is an AD caster item. We're going to be giving you this to you guys for you guys to use. But it's still scary. We know what Spear of Shojin did last time, and I'm very concerned about exactly what this is going to mean for the game going forwards. And finally, Ravenous Hydra has had a very small change where it now stacks like a Bloodthirster. It gives you half an AD and 0.1 Omnivamp whenever you kill an enemy, stacking up to 25 times. And you are stacking up to 50 times, and you lose 50% of these stacks on death. Which again, we're back to the state of farming BT top lane. I don't know. I don't know that I like this particular change. It's a bit of a weird one, but I guess it works. So anyways, that is it. That is a ton of changes. I totally get if there's way too much for you guys to be considering right now, but I'm excited to see what this is going to mean overall for the game. I am a big fan of these item changes. I think that there are a lot of new options and tools to play with. I'm glad Chemtech Drake is coming back. I think there are a lot of things that I'm excited to see how they're going to play out, but I also think that there are a lot of things that I am not a big fan of. But you guys let me know down in the comments what you think of all of these changes, especially the pets. I'm very curious to see what the public opinion of pets is. But if you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like. If you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.